So we're gonna talk about TRESA, guys, which is replacing the REBBA Act. And over to you, Yash.
So let's get started. So starting with that information before I let David introduce.
Yeah, we can skip over this picture because I don't no longer look like that. And so it just depresses me to see it. So there's a better picture for everybody to look at. Look at that guy. And I'm really glad we're doing this today with Yash, because some of you have, many of you have already been able to deal with him since he joined our firm. He's a fabulous person. He's a fabulous lawyer. He's got a great knowledge base. He picks up things so quickly, and his expertise is really remarkable for someone as young as he is. But he's a sponge. He learns everything, and he loves providing legal services and explaining things to people. So he's the perfect guy to have on for this webinar. So I'm really going to take a back seat in this for the most part, because Yash knows more about this topic than I do. And I'm no shame in me admitting that, because he's been looking into this and dealing with it, and he's already done a few of these webinar presentations for other brokerages on this, as have I. But I'm sure you'll enjoy hearing from him instead of me today. And we don't have to go through. Yeah, we can skip some of the other introductory slides, because everybody, I think, here knows our firm and the type of service we provide. And please, reach out to us directly or through social media, whatever. And make sure that you're tuning into the David and David on podcast, which I got to plug that, because I know David's probably listening or watching, or he's going to hear about it anyways. He's going to say, how come we didn't mention our podcast? So we have discussed this topic on the podcast before. Please check out, listen to it, watch it. You can watch on YouTube. You can go to the Corman's YouTube channel and see all our podcasts there, and Jonathan's Chosen Life podcasts are on there. So tune in, check it out, pick it topic by topic. We've had some great guests on, and more coming. So please check it out. So with that, I think I'm just going to throw it back to you, Yash, because I know there's a lot of slides to get through and a lot of material. So thanks everybody for joining us, and Yash, take it over, please.
Thank you so much, David, for the amazing introduction. Now, coming to TRESA. So this talks about how REBBA is going to transform into TRESA on December 1st, 2020. So we're just less than 2 months away. Just less than a month. Yeah. The new changes coming in, the major changes. This slide basically talks about how it has been REBBA for now, how the new legislation was introduced, got passed, and now it's going to become TRESA once the new regulations come in. The first phase that came in on October 1st, 2020 was the one that introduced incorporation of BRECs and some rules that were introduced about agents advertising. So that was phase one. So this is the phase two that we'll be focusing our discussions on, which the major changes that we've been hearing about, self-represented parties, about contents of competing offers, about designated representation. We'll go through all of that. I think essentially RECO is working on most of the documents, making them standardized documents which you can hand out to clients or use as forms to comply with your obligations. But it increases an onus as you on agents, as brokers, as brokerages, to make sure you have enough records for your files, making sure you have enough written instructions from your clients. We joke about it on other seminars that, like, if I see RECO's legislation or new code of ethics and we pick up law society rules or the rules that we've been following so far as lawyers, it feels like somebody copied and pasted the rules from the law society and just changed the word lawyer to registrants. So the onus is that's how heavy onus now they're placing on registrants. So I think moving forward, it is best practice to have everything in writing with your clients. Make sure you have emails saved in your files. Even if you're doing a text, we usually say take a screenshot, keep it in your files, so that if an issue comes up later, you don't have to go back looking for them. So that's That's the essential, that's how your day-to-day activities are going to change in the coming years. So the first part of the slides will be key changes that will affect the all of the registrants, which includes agents, brokers, management team at brokerages, and the brokerage itself. The second part will focus on just the brokerages, major changes for brokerages and brokers. So starting with customers, clients, self-represented parties, the next few slides will be changes that are coming in effect, which will change how we see clients and self-represented parties when we talk about registrants. So for now, you had a distinction between clients and customers. So now they're getting rid of the word customers. There won't be a word customer in the new legislation. So you won't have customer agreements. So a person or an entity in a trade will either be a client or a self-represented party. So a client is someone or an individual or an entity who's a brokerage, who's a client of the brokerage. So previously or until now, you could have customer agreements with people. So they did not become your full-fledged clients, and they were neither a self-represented party. But that's not the case anymore. If you're in a relationship with an entity or a person, you're providing them any kind of service, even a simple listing, you have to enter a representation agreement with them, and they become your client. No matter what the magnitude of the service is, you have to enter a representation agreement with them. And the reason you have to look at this change not as a protection of your client, but mostly as a protection for self-represented parties. How they're changing your relationship with the self-represented parties, how you have to be cautious as soon as you hear the word self-represented parties, how you have to make sure they don't rely on your knowledge, they don't rely on your skill, or if they do, you have to make sure they enter a representation agreement with you. So that doesn't mean I've had questions before that. Does that mean that you can't enter a multiple representation situation anymore? You can still do that, but the thing is, your relation and your interactions with self-represented parties would change.
Just a quick add-on, guys. Just make sure that you realize that the main difference between customer service and client service is your fiduciary duties are applicable to both parties, even if it's just a person who came through an open house and wants to put an offer on your listing. Remember that if you are representing them, then your fiduciary duties will not just be to the seller, but also to the buyer.
Yes. And as we're talking about I would give an example of how, let's say you are representing a seller and you're doing an open house and a self-represented party approaches you. So the first determination would be to make sure, are they represented by another agent or are they self-represented? If they are self-represented party, there's only a limited scope of interactions that you can have with them. What the legislation is calling assistance to the self-represented party. Assistance is a word that's very narrowly defined in the legislation. There's only limited amount of services that you can provide them. RECO is posting updated bulletins on their website, and it's been recently posted, so I did not get a chance to go through it. But if you go through that bulletin, it gives you like simplified steps to take, like questions to ask yourselves if that assistance, if the assistance that you're thinking of or the self-represented party is asking for, can you provide them or not? Questions like, will it make them feel that they have to rely on your knowledge or your skill? Or is it incidental to your client's interest? That's how they're defining assistance to the self-represented party. If the interaction of the service that you're providing to the self-represented party is just an assistance, that is incidental to your client's interest. Coming to that example, that if you're representing a seller and there's an open house, a self-represented party, they approach you. If they ask you a question, let's say, I don't have an agent, can you show me around the house? So you can say, of course, yes, that's incidental to your client's interest. You can accompany them around the house, you can show them. But as soon as they start asking you questions like, all right, so what's the purchase price I should put in my offer? What are the clauses that I should put in my offer? That's where you draw the line and you say that you, like, in this case, you urge them to get another agent to represent them, and you won't be able to help them any further. Because if you help them with those questions, you're representing that they can rely on your knowledge and skill, and they can take action on behalf of those. So there can't be a clear line, of course, like there can't be a checklist that this is assistance or this is not, because that will depend on different circumstances. Every situation will be different as we go into the new changes. It's going to get developed. There'll be a general consensus within the industry what's assistance or what's not. So, but the bottom line in this would be that you have to make sure if dealing with a self-represented party, you err on the safer side. If you're going past your what you're allowed to do with a self-represented, best to take a step back and tell the self-represented party that you should get your own agent or you can't help them any further. So that's about clients and self-represented parties. Coming on to the RECO information guide. As you may know, they're getting rid of the working with the Realtor form, and they're replacing it with a RECO information guide, which you'll have to hand out to your clients. And also a RECO information disclosure to self-represented party form. So if there's self-represented party in a trade, you'll have to hand out that form to them, as if the same way you're giving the RECO information guide to your client, that form is to be given to the self-represented
So
party.
that, are we talking, Yash, of the working with the Realtor form?
Yes, so they're getting rid of that form. They're replacing it with the RECO guide.
Right, okay.
Yes. I was reading on the RECO website that they're coming up with a tool to help agents where they can use that tool to send out these forms, and they will also have an acknowledgement like a red receipt, where automatic red receipt where they can save and file, where that will substantiate that they sent the forms and they were actually received and read by the self-represented party and their clients. Talking about disclosures and how they have to be in plain language. Any disclosure that the legislation necessitates that you have to provide to your client or any other party in the trade, it has to be plain language, clear and concise. But this change is something I think that RECO or ORIA would be working on to standardize the documents to have it available for you. But one thing to consider is that when you give them, you have some kind of acknowledgement from your clients that they received it. So even if you don't have tools to get an automatic acknowledgement, maybe have them reply to your emails where you sent it saying that they received it. Just any kind of acknowledgement, at the least a text saying that they received your communication or that document would do as well. So, but yes, this is something I think that RECO or ORIA would be working on.
Yeah, and guys, just for you all, I'm attending this meeting with ORIA on the 10th, which is the coming Friday, and I will get all the forms at that point, and I'll be adding it onto our templates that we've
Thank
created.
you, Sabiha.
So coming to multiple representation disclosure, there was even under REBBA, even until now, there were disclosure requirements for you when there was a multiple representation situation. The things that have changed is that now, if you're entering into a multiple representation situation, you have to tell the parties involved how your duties and obligations change due to the fact that it's now a multiple representation, and have them acknowledge that fact. The content would also differ. The content would also differ how if it's a designated representation or not, because now they've introduced designated representations for the brokerages to adopt designated representation model, where different agents of the same brokerage can represent different parties in a trade, and that won't end up in a multiple representation situation. We'll go through that towards the end of the seminar, but that if it's a designated representation or a brokerage representation, that would affect what your disclosure requirements are. But again, I think there would be documents from RECO about that, about what your disclosure contents should be. But I would say have that in mind whenever you're entering into a multiple representation situation. You know from your brokerage what model it is, if they're using a designated representation model or a brokerage representation model. So you know what you're advising your clients on. So material facts, another onus that this legislation now places is that you have to take reasonable steps towards inquiring about material facts for a property. Whenever you're acting for a buyer, it's not only you have to disclose the material facts and your knowledge, but you also have to take active, reasonable steps to obtain information about material facts that you think might be present in a property. We've been telling agents that you might want to look into standard emails or communications to the other side whenever you're acting for a buyer. Facts that you think, in your opinion, that may be material on all properties, and then adding other facts. This will not only ensure that you're acting for in best interest of your client, but also you'll have email trail where you can show that you took steps. So even if the the seller's agent does not satisfactorily respond to you, at least you'll have an email trail, a written record that you actually tried getting that information. And whatever information that you get from the other agent, make sure you have that in writing to your client, that again, making record that you obtained that information, you took steps, and as soon as you knew about it, you disclose it to your client. Another thing would be to facts a seller is obligated to disclose. So there are certain facts where the law obligates the seller to disclose it to the buyer. What we also call latent defects or hidden defects that are not easily visible on a simple inspection, and especially the defects that can make the property uninhabitable or dangerous to live in. So any fact of that sort, if the seller knows, and now your seller client knows, and now you know as well, you have to advise them to disclose it to the buyer. If they choose not to do so, you have to explain them the consequences. And if they don't agree to disclose it, the legislation says you have to withdraw your representation. So you have to press upon them, press upon the seller to disclose it. And if they still insist on withholding that from the buyer, the only option the legislation gives you is to withdraw your representation. We have seen as lawyers these obligations on us, I would say, past many years, and David would agree as well. Such obligations have been on us from a long time, so it might look scary, but to manage client expectations in these kind of situations, but that's how the onus has increased now.
Many of you have attended seminars and webinars that we've done in the past. A lot of times we're talking about patent defects and stigmatized properties. We've done some in the past, and you might, those of you that attended will recall there's different obligations to disclose depending on who you are involved in the transaction. And I mean, there's an obligation, the seller's lawyer's obligation, like if Yash or I are working on it, we don't disclose anything. We have no duty to disclose anything that we know of, because our duty is strictly a duty to our client, the seller. Okay, so that's the law is really clear on that. Sellers have certain obligations to disclose certain things depending on what type of defect you might be talking about here. So sometimes there is a duty, sometimes there isn't a duty to disclose, and we can, as lawyers, we can help them through that process. And then you as agents have a different requirement to disclose, and part of it is, you know, once you have knowledge, you sort of have certain duties to disclose, and you have to have that discussion with the seller, but you can't knowingly not tell something that you know if you're asked something. So you have to either answer a question honestly with the information that you have, or you can decline to answer because your seller has told you not to answer. But if you decline, there's usually consequences of that. So because the buyer is going to read into something there. But you've got to be very careful. So this sort of takes it, this change law takes it a little bit further, but it's sort of in line with what was common practice before, what you should have been doing. You've got to get instructions from your seller. And if your seller is saying, you know, telling you to do something that puts you offside with your TRESA obligations, then you've got to, if you can't convince the seller to change the instructions, you've got to withdraw your services. Okay, so you've just got to be careful and deal with the facts as they come up.
I'll just take a quick second to add something to it. We had a situation where there was a home inspection on a property, and there was some water damage and mold that had come up in that inspection. The purchaser walked away. Any other offers that are accepted and you are in the knowledge of that latent defect, because mold is considered a latent defect and so is a crack in the foundation, which it was, you have to have that conversation with your client that you have to actually let the other party know that you know that this has happened. So the new offer has to, you have to relate this to the new offer that's coming in.
Exactly. It's always better to have that discussion with your client as soon as you can, so they know that they are obligated to disclose, because they won't know they are, if they're not regularly in the business of real estate. So always best to have that discussion at the offset. Coming to, I think, the most exciting change, a heavy topic of discussion, the change that is coming, sharing content of competing offers. We've been referring this change to also as an open offer process, but I would like to make a distinction there that it's not a purely open offer process. If there's a listing, there's 10 offers, it's not necessary that all 10 potential buyers will know all the contents of each other's offers. So it's not a purely open offer process. What this change is essentially doing is that there's a restriction currently where contents of a competing offer cannot be shared with other potential buyers. That restriction is now being taken off. So the seller has an option to disclose the part contents, full contents, or they have an option to withhold the entire contents. So the ultimate say in this process would be with the seller. So the seller makes a decision whether they want to disclose a certain content, they want to disclose the entire offer to the potential buyers, or they want to withhold the entire contents. Another fun thing is that they can change their instructions at any point of time. So if at the offset on the listing, they say, all right, I want to enter into a purely open offer process, you as my agent are authorized to disclose all the contents to all the buyers. They can change those instructions at any point of time, and they can keep changing at any number of times. So, so you have to make sure that you have enough and sufficient and clear instructions from the seller what kind of process they want, and if they change instructions, you have to act accordingly. So,
yeah, I'm just going to weigh in a little bit here on this one. You know, from just explained to you, it's clear that the seller is the one in control in terms of making decisions about what should be disclosed, should not be disclosed, or what not disclosed, what should be shared, etc. It's the seller's right to make those decisions, but don't lose sight of your role in this, because you're the one that should be managing your client and giving advice and coming up with the strategy for the best way to market this property and sell this property and how to deal with different offers, etc. So it's, you know, that's the importance that you bring to the table, and that's a really important role. So yes, the seller is the ultimate decision maker on it, but you're the one that should be driving the bus and giving them the options and explaining the pros and the cons of what should be shared, what shouldn't be shared, and the rationale behind that. You come up with the strategy, but once that's done, you've got to, if you're giving the seller choices that we could do A, B, or C, and here's why, you know, then ultimately it's the seller that's going to decide which one. You got to follow the seller's instructions on it.
Yes. Yeah. And I would say it's not very different from how we as lawyers we do act on certain transactions where we need client instructions. Sometimes they don't even know what we're talking about, what instructions we want from them. So that will be a discussion will be having with your clients. See, these are your options. These are the implications of each of your options, and now you have to make a decision on how to proceed. Practically speaking, like a regular seller would either the seller will have very certain requirements. For example, someone would only want it to be a bidding war on the purchase price. Someone would want to be an early closing. So factors like this will depend on what they instruct you to disclose or not disclose. So that's from the seller's point of view. Now, if we see it from the buyer's point of view, some buyers might instruct you that they don't want to enter into an open offer process. They're not comfortable with entering into a situation where the contents of their offer will be shared with other potential buyers. In that case, there's nothing in the legislation that addresses that. But like one suggestion for that is you can have that discussion with your buyer, and you can look into adding a clause where it restricts the seller from disclosing contents of that particular offer. And if the contents are disclosed, that offer becomes null and void. So even if the seller signs that offer, it becomes an agreement. It's still null and void if the content is shared. So
I want to make one more like best practices type of point here. And this is something that David Gorski and I have discussed quite often when we get together and do our podcast. When you're dealing with multi-offers or potential multi-offers as an agent, don't get fixated on price and say, okay, to your seller, well, let's just disclose price to each other. Price shouldn't always be the winner in a multi-offer situation. And sometimes a lot of agents get themselves and their clients in trouble if they're too fixated on just getting the best price. And sometimes the best advice you can give to your seller is, there's a lot of other factors talking about. Yes, we're going to try and get the best price we can, but what if the second offer that you've got has a better deposit? That could be a determining factor. What if they have a better closing date? What if the conditions are more reasonable, or the timeline for that, or they're ready to inspect? There's a lot of other factors that go into it on a multi-offer situation. So sometimes your role as a seller's agent is to make sure that your client's aware of that. And it's not always best price that should win on a competing offer situation. There's all these other factors that might be more material to your client when they understand the full picture. Okay, so I just wanted to throw that in there. Sorry, Ash, go ahead.
No worries at all. Yeah, that's a good point. That's what I was emphasizing on. Like it's instructions will depend on needs of different sellers, but again, they'll be looking towards you for advice, like what are the implications of disclosing different facts. But one essentially the thing to note is that if when acting for the seller, you need sellers. Ultimately, seller will instruct you and make sure you have those instructions in writing before you proceed to disclose anything. We'll be taking questions towards the end. Whenever I know a lot of you will have questions regarding this topic, but we'll take questions once we're done with all the slides. Coming to access to property. So real estate property now can be accessed either if the person accessing it is accompanied by a registrant, which is unchanged, but now a self-represented party or people not being accompanied by a registrant can access real estate with the seller consenting. So if you're acting for a seller, someone's coming in for a showing, they're self-represented or they don't have a registrant, you'll have to get your seller client's instructions for the consent. So if they consent, they can, the buyer or the viewer, they can go into the property without a registrant being present. So that's another major change. Request for information by RECO. So that's some general stuff which is included in the legislation, how RECO can ask you for information from any registrant for exercising these legislation. We refer to these changes as politically correct changes, how RECO is showing themselves as having more power and more disciplinary power, that they'll take more actions against non-complying registrants. But there's a new code of ethics for registrants which talks about conflicts of interest, confidentiality, no obstruction of the legislation. We have included the link at the bottom of the slide where we can access the new code of ethics, but it's I would say not a significant change, but it's still the conflicts of interest, confidentiality, and restrictions against obstruction of legislation has always been there. So you can go through the readings if you want. We've included them here for you. Coming to key changes for brokerages. Before I think we don't have the slide in here for the designated representation because it was recently introduced, but designated representation is a new change that'll be coming up. Brokerages will have an option to either use a brokerage representation model or a designated representation model. So in designated representation, let's say Sutton Summit, two different agents. One agent is representing the buyer, one is representing the seller. That won't end up in a multiple representation situation. That won't be considered a multiple representation situation anymore, as long as the brokerage has adopted the designated representation model. So the representation will be at the agent level. So one agent representing the buyer, one agent representing the seller from the same brokerage won't be a multiple representation anymore. As until now, we only saw brokerage representation. Representation was at the brokerage level. So different agents, it still led up to a multiple representation situation.
So Yash, is that only for, is it per deal action or is that across the board? You have to select this designation for the brokerage?
So it's per deal. Like you can have different models and different deals. But I would say like if you decide it on every deal, that might be a lot more work for the brokerage. It would be more advisable to have one model and use that moving forward. Otherwise, you'll have to advise each agent on each trade what model they have to adopt. Yeah, but you have an option to use it per trade as well. So yeah, that'll be the decision of the brokerage. Ultimately, the brokerage decide what the model will be. So that's a business's decision for the brokerage to make. And also, as I mentioned, your disclosure requirements for multiple representation will depend whether you're in a designated or brokerage representation. Designated representation is not a new concept. It has been in other provinces. Alberta has it for a long time. I think British Columbia has that as well. They're now introducing it here. Another major thing to note on designated representation is that the brokerage's obligations still remain the same as if it's a multiple representation. So let's say Sutton Summit has two different agents, one working for the seller, one for the buyer. The buyer's agent reaches sabiha for any question on a trade. Sabiha cannot advise that agent, which is detrimental to the interest of the other client. So the broker of record or the brokerage has to remain neutral, even in designated representation. It's the agents who are the designated representatives, but the brokerage has to remain neutral. Right, so coming to unclaimed trust funds, the unclaimed trust funds have to be submitted to RECO after 2 years. I think it was 1 year under REBBA, and now they're changing it to 2 years. Notification to RECO, brokerages have to notify RECO as soon as their liabilities exceed the realizable value of its assets, or they are unable to pay their liabilities when they become due. Anytime they think there's any insolvency proceedings against a brokerage, the brokerage will have to notify RECO. Shortfall in missing properties has to be notified to RECO immediately by brokerages. Any shortfall in the trust account, any property that was being held in trust by the brokerage for a client, if it goes missing, has to be notified to RECO right away. Additional records, that's I would say a catch-all clause that the legislation has provided an onus on the brokerage, that brokerage has to keep enough records that they deem fit on all trades. So that's a catch-all phrase, just to take into account possibilities that there might be records that need to be made on trades which are not covered under the legislation. Impact on registrants' day-to-day activities, as I was mentioning, that most of the stuff over here, RECO, they're working on standardizing documents, and it would come down to having written instructions from your clients and knowing your obligations, knowing the purpose of the different documents that now will be introduced, knowing your obligations on disclosing competing offers, contents. So yes, a lot of things will be changed, but I would say once the changes come into force and everyone starts to act accordingly, the new changes, there will be new interpretations for all the rules. There will be a general consensus. RECO is I went through went on the website recently. They have posted a lot of bulletins. I did not get a chance to look through them all. But if you can take a look on the bulletins, that'll have, I think, information and directions for you, simplifying the steps that you have to take to comply with different changes. Yeah, that's it. End of our slides. David, you're muted.
Before we go on to answer some chat questions or any of the questions that you have, we sort of skipped over a little bit on the code of ethics part of it, and because you could access these, so there's not a lot that's significantly different, but just so you'll know, like the intent of a lot of what Yash is explaining to you is you just have to be a little more defensive in the way that you conduct your business. It's a lot of this is just like cover your ass type of things, where before it was just sort of good practice, and now they're codifying a little bit, saying no, you've got to do this. So you've got to keep records, you've got to confirm things and get acknowledgments from your client so that they send you a text confirming your instructions to go ahead. So if something does happen, you've got a record to go back on it. And part of the code of ethics section that they've now given is this greater ability for RECO to have a little bit of teeth to try and enforce in case there is a bad actor, realtor that maybe not doing his job or across the line, and they require them to, let's see your documents, let's see your text, let's see your emails. So that there's a little more teeth in legislation so that they can enforce the rules. So anybody that's doing things properly and complying with the code of ethics and listening to what Sabiha and David are telling you should be doing, you're not going to have a problem with this. But so you should look at this as a good thing, because if you come across a bad actor on the other side of a transaction, you know that hopefully there will be repercussions. There is a mechanism in place for enforcement of some of these rules. So, keep your records, confirm everything, keep documents, keep the acknowledgements, get your clients to acknowledge it. That's sort of the key. And part of the other piece of the enforcement of this is there is legislation. A part of this is to say, you have a duty not to obstruct once there is a RECO investigation. You have to hand over everything. You got to keep records, whether it's on the brokerage level or it's on your level as an agent. And a lot of people get in way bigger trouble when they're charged with obstructing the legislation than with whatever potential wrongdoing or violation they may have committed in the first place. And it's no different. The best example, in the world right now is what Donald Trump is going through with some of the accusations against him. It's one thing to not hand over documents that you kept after you're no longer president, but if they say, hey, you've got some documents, just give them back, he's probably not going to be charged with anything, just like Joe Biden wasn't charged, and just like Hillary Clinton and other people that have kept things that they shouldn't have. As soon as it comes to their attention, they give it back. But what Trump has gone is he moved the boxes from this room to that room. He hid it. He didn't give him access. So now he's being charged with obstruction of justice, and they'll hammer him at the end of the day on that. Okay, so that's the lesson you should take from this. If you do have a complaint against you with RECO, as frivolous as it might be, or maybe it's got merit, either way, don't take any steps to obstruct. Okay, because you'll get in way bigger trouble. Make sure you comply with requirements, and hopefully you're keeping proper records so it's not a big deal for you to comply and hand things over to them. So just wanted to make that point because we sort of skipped through that a little bit. And I don't know, Sabiha, I assume we have some questions.
Sabiha, I think you're muted.
Yeah, we have some questions. We do have some questions. One is very interesting, and Abu, I can tell you that from the answer is no. He says, is there a provision for a retainer fees that can be charged by realtors for their clients, just like the lawyers and accountants do for their clients?
I don't think so. There's a specific provision that's addressing that. That's
Actually, on the contrary, if the deal doesn't get through even at the last minute, you do not get paid commission. So you can do all your work, and on the day of the closing, your commission is based only on finalized deals that have completed. So the answer is no.
Yeah, commissions are payable upon successful completion of the transaction. And that's why, that ties into my point that I was making before about best price shouldn't always win. Because if you're encouraging to collect the best price and you got a low deposit, and we're dealing, Yash and I are in the trenches right now dealing with a lot of transactions that don't close. Buyers run into financial difficulty, or they don't get the financing they were expecting to get, and they don't close. And now you may have encouraged someone to accept that highest price, and they give a very small deposit, and your seller client's got an inability to maybe chase down and recover all their costs from that. When you may have let go a lesser price offer and or deposit or better conditions, or they don't need financing, and that might have been a better way to go, because at the end of the day, you want to get paid, and you're only getting paid on successful completion. So you're not doing a service to your client, you're not doing a service to yourself if you get too fixated on the price. Look at the overall offer, and because you want to find somebody as a buyer that has an ability to close. You're not getting paid otherwise.
And I'd like to add to that for a quick second, guys. It's also really important to understand that it's not, the first page of the agreement of purchase and sale, and then your Schedule A is your negotiating platforms, right? So David's 100% right, but on the flip side of it, just even when you're listing, the best practice would be, if date is not the most important criteria for your client, the closing date, then you put to be discussed or to be addressed, right? And you're putting the purchase price. Sometimes the date is the most important, right? So a lot of times you will put, it's totally legal for you to put $1 or $5 or $10 as sale price. So basically that is up for negotiation, especially when you're selling a product you're not 100% sure where it sits in price. So it literally can be anything that is most important to your client, right? A lot of times you'll see trust funds or banks or lawyers closing the deal for the clients for whatever reason it may be, a foreclosure or so on and so forth. And the price might be up in the air, right? For whoever brings but the date is very important. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at that. There's another question, Taurus, asking self-representation, no fiduciary duties, correct? That David or Yash, I would let you answer that.
Yeah, I would say that's the distinction that they're trying to make here, that self-represented bodies, you don't have fiduciary duties against for them, and that's what you have to clarify with the self-represented parties, that you don't have duties towards them, so they shouldn't rely on your knowledge and skill. I think that's the reason they are introducing these changes now, so that self-represented parties just by the fact that there's an agent present in the trade, they don't rely on their knowledge and skill.
Yeah, and I'll go back to the latent defect topic that Yash you had discussed earlier. A simple thing is, as a listing agent, if you know that there is any issues with the property, you're not representing the buyer, for instance, but you know that there's latent defects or material defects with the property, you have to share that with the other party. your fiduciary duties are with your client. However, you cannot cover for any material or latent. So same would be for a self-represented person. You will have to declare if there's any big issues with the property to that person, whether they're represented or not by you or someone else. Who's brought this up? This is coming from a fact where there are buyers being not loyal to their realtors and end up making purchases through another realtor, exploiting the loopholes such as I did not know. So Abu, the listing agreement and the buyer representation agreement have the first bubble on the right-hand side on the first page, which clearly says that they are not represented by anybody else. If they go ahead and make a deal with someone that you have shown the property to, or while you have been the property has been listed, then you can actually go and sue the seller and the buyer within your holdover period also, not even just after cancellation. So if they have gone ahead and worked with someone else, you can go ahead and take care of that and protect your commission if there may be. There was a bulletin that was emailed to all of us by RECO last week. I will forward it again to everybody. I printed it out, guys. Do this for yourself. Print it out, highlight the important parts. And Abu, the holdover period is once again mentioned in it very clearly. So it's not just while the listing is active or the buyer representation agreement is active, but even after the cancellation, there's a holdover period that protects your commission.
And just a general principle on any agreement or any contract, you cannot use ignorance as a ground that you're not bound by it. Otherwise, anyone can rely on ignorance of contract provision that they did not know of. So they're still bound by it, even if they weren't.
Yes, but the holdover period provision that's mentioned in the bulletin very clearly specifies that as realtors, we have the duty to our clients to very clearly explain to them what a holdover period is. Because a lot of people will just send the documents on DocuSign, the clients sign it. They're not getting any legal representation to actually review the documents that the realtor has made them sign. So make sure as realtors, you very clearly explain the holdover clause to your client, because that's specifically one of the points in the bulletin, that we are responsible for explaining the holdover period to our clients.
Yeah, so Sabiha, the thing is, when I look at the REBBA or TRESA rules, the laws, the bylaws and all, it always protects the consumers or the clients, and there is hardly things left with the realtors. The clients can go away with that I didn't know. I'm seeing this more and more now, like people are working with multiple realtors simultaneously, and they outright lie on your face saying that, no, I'm not working with any other realtor. And then you say, like, you get them signed on that place that they're not working with any other realtor, that exclusive on the part. And then you go and do when you realize that they have done that, you sue them, and then you wait for 2 years, and then still you don't get a court date. And that is something actually really doesn't help the realtors. I mean, you cannot keep spending your bandwidth on this kind of legal proceedings and all those when the REBBA or TRESA is not even protecting the realtors. It's always protecting just the clients.
Yeah, so TRESA is basically best practices to better service the consumer. It's a consumer protection, not a realtor protection in any which way. The name just outrightly says it, right? But however, at the end of the day, that, for instance, if you put anything like Ontario in your buyer representation or your listing, you cannot, because it's for a specific property. But if you're doing buyer representation and if you put the area as Ontario, it'll be thrown out. You have to be specific, because when we study our courses, it clearly defines that you possibly can have 2 realtors representing you in 2 different areas. So
No.
somebody can hire me to show them properties in Oakville and you to show them properties in Ajax. That's totally acceptable, practice. However, if whoever has signed the BRA first and is in place, then they get the first right. However, if your client has been explained to and has signed on a BRA with you, clearly stipulating that they are not working with anybody else and that you are showing them properties on Oakville, and if they have another agreement, they've actually gone ahead and used the other agent for it, or used another agent after you, you can sue them. Yes, it does take a period of time because of whatever delays there may be, but you do hold your rights then at that point, and it is what it is, unfortunately.
So I understand that part, like being specific and all, but not even getting the court dates for 2 years, that's really difficult to digest. Like, I mean, you did everything possible, got a BRA signed, have that exclusive things done, had specific areas, and still somebody went ahead and did this, and then you sue them, and then you wait for 2 years just to get a court date, and you don't know where it is heading.
Right.
I'll agree with your frustration, Abu, against organizations like RECO and even like for us, the Law Society. But one thing that we have to come to terms with is that organizations like LSO and RECO, their mandate is to protect the public and not the professionals. I agree that's not fair on us as the professionals. But even if if we do anything wrong, I call up LSO today. I'm having issues with that. They're going to refer me back to the rules. They're not there to help us. They're there to protect the public against non-compliance of what rules that govern us.
Yeah, and it does create a safer environment for everybody else, right? What does TRESA stand for? Trust in Real Estate Act, right? Because there is a lot of mistrust, because there is a lot of players that are not working according to what it should be. Anyways, we're going a little off topic. Any other questions, guys? I see some messages. Nigel has asked, multiple offers on a property, say 4, seller has signed a direction to share substance of the offers. One buyer does not want their offer details disclosed. The other 3 buyers are okay with the disclosure. I think, Nigel, it is the onus is with the seller to direct you, not the buyers. The buyer's offer has come to your table, and it is up to your seller whether they would. So it's really not the buyer's wishes that are important at this point. The one buyer gets to know details of the other 3, but the other 3 don't get to know how is that fair. So just to clarify it, the seller's direction is what they're looking for in terms of whether the offers are to be shared or not the buyers. I hope that answers that question.
And I agree that might not seem fair on the buyer's part, the part of the buyer that are not getting to know the content of the offers of the other buyer. But that's something that now we'll see more of. And
but yes, it doesn't work like that. How it works is if my property has 4 offers on it, right? It is up to me to tell my realtor that I'm okay with you disclosing those offers to the buyers.
Yes.
The buyers don't have the right to hold that back. So it will be very fair, because as a buyer for my property, everybody will get to know it, almost like an auction situation, because I think they're more and more tending towards that. All of this is going to tend towards that. Guys, David and I spoke about this earlier. David Corman, remember when we talked about us always following suit of whatever's happening in BC. And in BC, they have prohibited multiple representation completely. So rest assured, this is where we're going is, number 1 is open auctions, and number 2 is on properties, and number 2 is multiple representation is going to be taken off. Because right where they're talking about multiple representation and that all deals have to be on multiple representation, they're also talking of conflict of interest. Yash had that slide up right up there. So
Good.
how are you supposed to represent 2 parties, without having conflict of interest right there and there where you have fiduciary duties with both properties? with both parties.
That's good. Yeah, and we tend to follow BC a lot of times as opposed to leading BC. We're not sure why, but we're always taking a look to see what they're doing over there because a lot of times they're doing it before we are. But so there's no certainty that what's working there is going to work here or be done here, but we always take a look, like Sabiha says, because it sort of gives us an idea of what might be next.
That's right. Karen has a very good point, and yes, Karen, they do, but then I think that question was the statement was answered right away. She says when it comes to buyers considering putting in a clause, if the buyer is not comfortable disclosing the content of their offer, i.e., if it is disclosed, they can back out of the offer.
Yes.
They can back out of it, but then that offer is not on the table anymore. So, yes, Yash, go ahead.
I think that what Kirin mentioned is a follow-up on Nigel's question that how if one buyer puts in a clause that restricts the seller to disclose their contents, wouldn't it be unfair for the other potential buyers that their offer's content is being shared, but they are not able to get contents of the buyer who put that clause in? So yes, that like the buyer will have to make a determination whether they want to put that clause in or not. But again, that might and most likely will reduce the suitability of the offer if the seller wants an open offer process. So it might be unfair, but then again, it'll be a decision for the clients to make whether they want to include that offer. It'll be the seller's decision whether they want to disclose it or not. So yeah.
I think that is it. Thank you so much, Yash. It was lovely meeting you face to face. I've heard great things about you from some of our realtors that have already worked with you as to how quick you are to respond and how accurate your responses are, and you're very available. So this is, I'm not just making this up, guys. I actually have heard this from multiple realtors that have used Yash from Cormans. So welcome to Cormans, because I feel like we're all a team. So I want to just put that out there, and thank you for this wonderful presentation. Guys, we will keep addressing this topic as it is a big topic in our practice, and wonderful. And Yash, I look forward to you forwarding me this recording so that I can share it with the rest of the brokerage.
Yes.